episode of The Shift is sponsored by the Ultimate Faith Store. This store carries faith-based apparel and accessories for men, women, and children. To purchase an item from the Ultimate Faith Store, please use the link attached to this episode and use the code JCamille for 10% off. Now, back to the episode, Jay. Welcome to The Shift, a podcast here to help you adjust to the new. I'm your host, Jay Camille. If this is your first time watching, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow my Facebook page, and keep up with The Shift on Instagram. This podcast is here to help you get through anything, everything, all things new. Whether it means moving to a new city, starting a new career, getting through a new relationship, or even getting through new tough times such as anxiety and depression. So get ready, get set, and let's shift. See you guys soon. So hi everyone, it is your host as usual, Jay Camille. We are tuning in for another episode of season 3, the Shift podcast, which is shifting out of shock. So as you all know, this season we've been talking about getting out of this stuck place because with the pandemic, as well as with other traumatic experiences that people have gone through, a lot of people are in this state of stuck and they don't know how to get out of it. They don't know how to move. And I was in that season my own self. And after learning how to get out of it and the resources that I could draw up on to help me, I now want to share those same things with you, as well as pull upon some experts and mentors to give us those tips and resources that we need as well to get out of that place. So today we are talking about somatic healing, and I have a very special guest. I've actually never heard of this type of healing before until talking with her. So I'm so excited for her to share with her her experience on somatic healing, and I can't wait for you all to learn about it for yourself. So bringing to the stage, we have Marina Yanay-Triner. Marina, welcome to the Shift podcast. Please tell us a little bit about yourself. Oh, 1 second. Okay, we can see you now.
Perfect. Hi, it's so nice to be here with everyone. I am Marina. I'm a transformational coach, and I work with empaths who are also high achievers. And I use a lot of tools. And one of my favorite, most powerful tools is the somatic healing modality. And I'm so excited to share it with all of you today.
Yes. Okay. So, Marina, what is somatic healing? Just for people who don't know what that is.
So somatic really is the body. It's body, everything that relates to your body. So when you think of a lot of healing, coaching, therapy modalities, you're thinking with your mind, you're in your brain. And somatic modalities also, can go by embodiment, which is from the word body. It has to do with really getting into your body and shifting from your body rather than your mind.
That's good. That's different. See, and that's why I'm like, I've never even heard of that type of healing, because usually I think of shifting with your mind and going to like a counselor or a therapist where they're like, oh, well, what you set up your mind upon is what you tend to feel. And so they really encourage you to think differently and think positively, which is good. But at the same time, I've never have stopped to think about the effects that it has on the body and how I can shift my body to adjust how I'm feeling or responding to an experience. So I'm definitely excited that we're talking to our listeners about it today, that you're going to give us all the tips on it and what we need to do to heal better, because we've talked about the mind in previous episodes, but we have not talked about the body. So tell us a little bit about your somatic healing experience and then how you used your experience to then help others.
Yeah, and I am so excited to also talk about this because until I found this, I'm not saying that, the mind is not important. It's super, super important. And I still, with my coaching clients, of course, we talk and we still focus on other parts of us. So those things may come up in this podcast as well. But I was so excited to find this specific way because I personally found very rapid transformation in my own life from it, as well as the people that I work with. So, how I found it is that I have always kind of been searching for healing in different ways from many years of trauma. And I went to therapy for years and years, which was good for me at the time. But then it just came to a point where I was like, I want therapy through my body. Like, I'm tired of talking. I want to find someone who can really support me through the body. And that was kind of an intuition that I had. And the interesting thing is that this intuition really came from me starting to connect again to my body, because for many years I was very disconnected. And that's one of the things that trauma does. It disconnects us from the body, because the body no longer is a safe space for us. So I started to, through actually having my own business and having my struggles with my business and really trying to solve them through thinking about it or doing, I started to dive into my body and a connection with my body, and just to really sit and feel into, sense into my body. And I believe that the intuition to seek a therapist that works somatically came from that experience. So when I started to do the search, somebody referred me to my therapist, which works through somatic experiencing. And that's how I began that journey.
Awesome. So, and this is again just me asking out of like curiosity. So when you first like did that experience with your therapist, like how did that feel? Were you like, this is different compared to like normal therapy, or was it what you were looking for? Because you said you were looking for kind of like a healing experience in your body.
Yeah, I was looking to do something different and to stop talking so much. And the funny thing is that I still, which you can tell, I love talking. So I still kind of tried to talk a lot. And it was very different, because it was really about the nervous system, and that's where the healing through somatic work comes in, is through our nervous system. So I just noticed that I'm talking a lot and I'm talking fast, and I feel like, oh my gosh, I have an hour, I have to like work through all these things. Like, this is how it's going. And even that pace of me talking, like, that's something that she made me aware of, because that's my nervous system, because our nervous system is really there to help us survive, and our brain is there to help us survive. So when we're in the survival mode, which is really a trauma driven experience, we're always like looking for the next danger and scanning, for danger. And so we start talking really fast. And I have a lot of clients that I notice do this, and I kind of make them aware of that. Instead of focusing on the content of what people say, it's really interesting to observe like the body language and the pace that they're talking and what's happening with their breathing. Like, I often notice that when we dive into topics that have, a lot of trauma in them, my clients will like kind of like have a hard time breathing or breathe really fast. And all those things are very different about the somatic way of looking at things.
Yeah, no. And it's crazy that you mentioned that, because when I think about that, like for my own self and how I respond to experiences, like as you started describing your breathing, I know I definitely do that. Like and I feel like most people do, when you're panicking, like if let's say your alarm is going off or something, you start speaking really fast. You're like, oh my gosh, like I got to get there. I got to call this person. I got to, do X, Y, Z, and check off this box. And so it's funny. It's really ironic that your body does respond in that way. And then now, I guess, using this somatic healing experience to teach your body how to respond differently. Yeah, that's interesting. It's something I feel like I'm going to take note of in myself, because just as you described it, I'm like, I see myself doing those things.
Yeah.
And it can
Yeah.
even be like in small things. If a friend has called me, or my mom, especially, if my mom calls me and I haven't answered and I have 3 missed calls from her, I'm probably panicking. And like, there's some kind of like heart pound, or I like call her and the tone in my voice is like, a little nervous that she might go off on me or something, because it's like, why didn't you answer your phone? So yeah, that's something I'm definitely going to pay attention to.
I
So
love that you actually brought up those small things, because I find that especially for people who have a lot of trauma, we try to really like change quickly and look for those like huge changes. But the truth is that the biggest change comes from those small moments, just like you
mm,
said, like really noticing, oh, I'm like like my chest feels really tight right now and I'm breathing like so fast, and just like pausing, really noticing your body, and just being with that, instead of like, what should I tell her, what should I do, how's the conversation going to go, our brain
yeah.
just goes really fast and we're always like focused on the story, but the way we are being in the world is actually really, really important.
No, that's so true. And why else, like, I 100% agree with what you're saying, is because as we learn to change those things within ourselves, we can help others. So the other day I was sitting in a safety moment for my job, is what they call them. And this guy was talking about how lightning had struck a tree and his wife was panicking because it could hit the house. And so she called him in a panic, and he was remaining like calm on the other side. And he talked about how like the response was, thank you for being like so calm about it, because had he panicked too, it probably wouldn't have helped them solve the problem more quickly, because it would have been like, oh, both people are panicking, or both yelling and screaming at each other. What are we going to do? Can we afford this? Is the house okay? Did everyone get evacuated? Where's the dog? Where's this? But it's like, okay, what's going on? What are the steps that we need to do? And so it's like, as he had that like somatic levelness, then it helped her to calm down, like in her somatic self. So yeah.
Yeah, and that is actually, there's a term for that. It's called co-regulation.
Mhm.
So our nervous systems actually like begin to mirror each other and they shift and change together. So it's really cool that you bring that up, and it just kind of shows, because you said you're new to this, and I think it shows how intuitive somatic healing is for us, because it just makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
if someone's stressed out in the room with me, I'm going to get more stressed, right? So there's an
Yeah.
actual term for that.
That's cool. Okay, I'm learning something. I'm excited, and we're teaching people. So during our 101, we talked about using this to help us shift out of that frozen response, because we talk about, like, people talk about flight or fight, but then there's also a frozen in there too, where people just don't do anything and they're like, I don't know what to do. And so we talk about that, but how do we use this to apply to shifting out of that? And especially because in this season of the Shift podcast, we're talking about shifting out of shock and shifting out of that state of like stuck. And it may not necessarily apply to just the pandemic. People can be dealing with other things: depression, anxiety, PTSD, cancer, but how do we help them shift out of that frozen response?
Yeah, I love this question. First, I want to give like a little bit of context so that this makes sense.
Okay.
Because you said fight or flight. So we basically kind of have three survival responses, and that's fight, flight, or freeze. And this pandemic, I'm sure, brought up all the different survival responses for everybody. And Peter Levine, who is the founder of Somatic Experiencing, he tells the story about these kids that were basically, they were abducted and they were underground in some shed or something. And they researched these kids years later, and they found that only one kid really didn't have any trauma symptoms, which being frozen is actually a trauma response. And the
Mm,
reason was that he was the only one that actually was fighting. He was actually digging, like physically with his body, he was like digging to find a way out.
mm,
So when we have any kind of trauma, in this pandemic is very traumatizing for a lot of people, we our body like just builds up all this energy to fight, this thing. And if we actually get this energy out by fighting, by doing something, or by running away, then this energy leaves our body. And by energy, I don't mean like Reiki or that kind of energy. I mean, like
Yeah.
actually like when you're running, and you feel all this energy. And then if we don't do anything, like we go into a state of shock, which is also common. And actually animals, they play dead a lot of times, and they do that for a
That makes
reason,
sense.
because if they're being hunted and they play dead, they have a greater chance of running away. If they are put like in a different location where there's more quiet and less animals for the other animal to eat them, they can actually run away. So one of our responses can be playing dead, which is exactly that stuckness, the freeze response, which is very common with trauma. And so that actually gets stuck in our body. That's energy that needs to come out, survival energy that needs to come out, that is just stuck in our bodies. So through somatic work, which is a very long-term and gentle process, because this is energy that we don't want to release just like in one session, because it's very intense energy. And again, in trauma, we disconnect from the body. So even building that connection back up is like a gentle process. We allow that energy to come out, to come up and out. And it is the most incredible, alive feeling that you've ever felt when you finally release that. So some of the steps that we start with is even just like sitting on a chair, feeling yourself on the chair, feeling your body on this chair, feeling the connection between your back and the chair, and then starting to form a connection with your body. So starting, like we were talking about, noticing sensations in our body, because stuckness goes with freeze, numbness, like feeling nothing. We live from the neck up. And that was me for so many years, just living from the neck up, as well as clients, that come to me and they say, I feel kind of hopeless. I feel bored. I feel stuck. I don't know. A lot of times I hear, I don't know, when I ask them a question, and I tell them, you do know. It's just inside you and you haven't accessed it yet. So the work we're going to do is to help you access, but you do know. Because we all know, like, the wisdom is in there. It's not out there.
Yeah.
And so forming the connection with your body is just actually sensing. Like, even if you can feel your right toes, what do they feel like? Do they feel like there's tingling there? Does it feel like pressure? Like, just actually sensing your body, and starting very slow and very gentle, and then spending more and more time just sitting and sensing your body. That's a really big one.
Man, that is so good. One, especially because, you made the comment of we live from the neck up. And at first I went to think, I wonder what she meant by that. But then I feel like as though it's because we often just think about things, but we don't think about what we feel. So that's what you meant, right?
Yes, that we're
Yeah.
constantly thinking and we actually don't feel our bodies. And that's why people are like, I don't know, because they're
Yeah.
not in touch with their body, and your intuition and your instinct. Like, all these animals, like if you see an animal in the wild, and they never not know, they're in tune with their instincts and their intuition, and they just go, because they just know. And we have the same thing, but sometimes it just gets frozen, so we're just not in touch with it.
Yeah, no, that's so good, and that's so true. And it's so funny that we're talking about this on today, because literally, I kid you not, on Friday, I had to go to the chiropractor because I was experiencing pain in my body, like, and it was in my back. And I go to the chiropractor, and they're asking me about like different things, or what do you do, blah blah blah, and I'm like, I've done nothing than what I normally do, but it can be the smallest things, like not getting enough sleep, or maybe a situation happened that caused you to stress a little bit more than you normally do. That triggers your body. And so then, like, they're like telling me about the different places in my spine, and they're like, yeah, it looks like you're carrying a lot of stress in your shoulders, or maybe this lack of sleep or how you slept on this side of your body affected this. And I'm like, I guess I just never paid attention to those things because to me, I'm like, they're small things. But then if you don't address them when they're small things, then they build up into something big. And so then, I only address it when it's something big. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have this excruciating pain in my back, when it's like, if I took the time to do small things and address the small things, then, and like you said, stop and feel those sensations and say, okay, maybe me sleeping on this side made me get a crick in my neck or something, that I need to not sleep like this again. And then as a result, it wouldn't have impacted the rest of my body. So it's definitely something. It's just like I said, it's so ironic that we're talking about this today, because I didn't even plan on that. But that's how things work in my life, is usually when it's meant for us to talk and encourage people in that area, I usually go through it before I have to talk to someone about it, so that I can better relate. So everything that you're saying is so true. So speaking of small things, what are small things that you recommend we can do to retrain ourselves to practice this type of healing that you've mentioned? Because of course, I know you do coaching and everything, but this is like a small podcast session. And so what are some things that, like, listening to this, we can say, okay, I'm going to start practicing these small things maybe before someone is like, okay, I want to book a coaching session with you or something like that.
Yeah. So I think thinking about first how you grew up, and when you were growing up, what was the level of stress and anxiety in your house? It's fascinating, especially around certain topics. For example, in my family, around money, it was just level 10 out of 10 stress. So it's really fascinating to reflect on those areas in your parents' behavior and conversation that you were observing, because when you're little, you're like a sponge, like you're learning to talk from your parents. So just imagine how much else you're learning from your parents just by even observing them, not them directly telling you. So just kind of reflect on not just the things that they said, but also the level of stress and anxiety that they had around certain topics, and kind of start to write down what were the things that they were saying and doing, and reflect on how that is showing up in your life. It's quite fascinating, let me tell you, because you'll start to notice that you are most likely either exactly repeating those things or being a rebel. And when you're a rebel, you're doing exactly the opposite. It's many times out of anger at your parents, which is not an energy that we want also. So, for example, for me, I started to notice that I had a lot of stress as a child in my house around me. My parents were immigrants, they were moving twice, and there was a lot of anxiety and stress and this like survival energy. And my partner had the same. So a lot of our fights were literally the two of us recreating this, because, and it wasn't even like the content wasn't that interesting. Like the content wasn't important. We didn't have, meaningful fights. Like we can talk about things. We're really good at talking about very intense topics, but then we would fight about really silly things. And it wasn't until I learned about the nervous system and the body that I realized, oh, we are literally recreating what we grew up with for no reason other than, this is the familiar. So this is, this awareness is really interesting. That's one thing. Another thing is to, again, really pay close attention to your body's responses. Maybe you have constriction in certain areas in your body. Maybe you start to sweat. Maybe your heart rate goes up. And something really interesting to do is like read a story, or even like imagine a situation. But I feel like when you read a story, it's so interesting to actually notice your body as you're reading it. Like this person went to a dark forest and they were walking alone. And even right now, I'm telling you this, I feel my stomach like constricting because I don't like the dark, right? So start to notice like what's happening, and start to notice any like tingles in your hands, in your feet, which a lot of times those tingles are like your impulse to start running. So these things are really, really helpful to literally just notice your body. And another thing, which to me, like, I can tell you, me personally, I try to do these things. Well, the feeling of my body comes pretty easily to me now. But the next thing I'm going to share is something that I find super helpful to do with a professional by my side, because again, there's co-regulation with that person, but also they can guide you so that you're not like guiding yourself and noticing. And that is something called pendulation. So it's a very basic principle in somatic experiencing. And what it means is to pendulate. So like a pendulum moves, back and forth between the constriction and the openness. So if you start to think of something that really, really scares you, like let's say you're terrified of public speaking or whatever it is that you're like super scared of. And when you think about it, you feel this sense of like heaviness or constriction or this kind of like shrinking or freezing feeling in your body. And you feel that, and then you go into a place in your body at the same time that feels open and relaxed. And it can even be like your right finger, big finger, just like one little area. Just ask yourself, where do I feel okay? Like, where do I not feel constricted right now? And then you feel that, and then you kind of go back and forth slowly between the two. And it's really, really cool because slowly it's almost like defrost, because we're talking about freezing. You'll feel like your body is defrosting and you can move again, because you feel right when we're scared, we do this and everything like squeezes and freezes and we don't want to move. And then when we pendulate like that, it's like a release, and suddenly you feel like, oh, I can move, I can breathe, like my breath is back. And usually I'll see my clients do this. I always see them at the end of like a pendulation session, and they'll say, oh my God, I feel so good.
Yeah.
Because it's like something released. So that's a really powerful tool. And then, Peter Levine's books are amazing. And he gives you so many exercises in there. Like Healing Trauma is a really good one. You can listen to it and he walks you through exercises that you can actually do. So that is really, really powerful.
Wow. These are definitely things I'm going to check out. And I definitely feel like the listeners are as well, because like I said, this is something that is rarely talked about. It's not very mainstream, but it's something that I feel like people need to practice, myself included. And especially I loved the first one that you talked about, which was awareness, because it goes back to when people talk about history repeating itself. And so you talked about, what you deal with in your family, how you came up as a child. Children are sponges. If we don't realize what those things are, we don't know how to break the cycle. And oftentimes as adults, we do go back to those things. And a lot of us say, okay, well, we're consciously trying to get away from them, which means that we are going to therapy, going to counseling, and we're trying to break the mindset of those things, but we don't realize what we're subconsciously doing. And so this is really getting into that subconscious side to say, yes, maybe in your family you dealt with drama or not, what's the opposite of financial freedom? Being worried about finances. And so anxiety. And you dealt with that as a child. And so then unconsciously or consciously, you're saying to yourself, okay, well, I'm going to choose to fight against those things. And this is what I'm going to do to fight against them. I'm going to choose friends and groups that are drama free. I'm going to break the barriers and cycles, to become debt free. And you have all these lists of things that you set out to do consciously, which is great. But subconsciously, you don't realize maybe, and I'm preaching to the choir because I'm talking about myself too. Maybe you're too eyes on the book when it comes to the finances, and you're like, okay, like we can't spend this much, or I can't live, because you're so worried about money, or, you're worried about getting around a crowd of people to encourage them because you're like, oh, there's drama tied to them. Those kinds of things that you subconsciously do when really it goes back, like you said, all the way back to your childhood, all the way back to what you're comfortable with, and then breaking those barriers there. So I love that you talked about awareness, because I think that's the key to any kind of illness. Any kind of healing, you first have to be aware of where it is that you need to heal and where you need to target, what the root is.
Yeah. And it's just so fascinating. I mean, unfortunately, I've had to dig into my childhood a lot. I mean, kind of unfortunately, because I also feel like if I didn't have to, I'd be so bored. Because this work is fascinating, and I've learned to do it with a lot of compassion. But it's like, let's say if you have a goal and you're doing all the possible strategies, right? Like maybe you have a business. I'm going to talk about myself. You have a business and you're doing the marketing and you're doing everything right. And there's still something that's not working, like you're still not getting your goal. That's when you can know for sure that you have to dive into the unconscious and subconscious beliefs, behaviors, emotions, all these different things, to really unravel like what is holding me back. And that's where, like, a really great example I just had with a client is that she had a troubled relationship with her mother, and she was having trouble creating really safe and beautiful friendships, and she couldn't figure out why. And I kind of asked her, so do you feel like these friends that you are attracting, do they remind you of anyone? And she figured out that it was literally her mother in all these friendships. And when we have trauma, especially trauma shows up a lot in relationships, and we, like you're saying, the cycles, that is huge. Like, we try to solve our trauma very often through relationships, because subconsciously we're like, well, that didn't work out when I was little, so I'm just going to keep trying. And it's very sad, because every time I try, it ends the same way, because it's the same type of person, right? And so until we go back and release that energy with our mom or dad, or, I mean, it can of course be somatic, but it can also be inner child work, which I'm a huge fan of, which also really goes into the subconscious, and release that, then we can start to see, oh, well, I don't have to attract these people anymore, because I have worked through this thing with my mom, and now I can begin to attract different friendships, different dynamics in my friendships.
That's so good. And that's so true. And I feel like that resonates with so many people, but I'm going to tell you, it definitely resonates with me, because when we talk about somatic things, as you were talking, it made me think about myself and particular like family relationships that I have a rough time with, and how I often find myself recreating them in friendships. And like, as you were talking and describing that client experience, like I started getting tingly all over, because I was like, ooh, she's talking about me. And I know you weren't, but I mean, that was so good. And that's so real. And I don't think a lot of people realize that they are doing that.
For sure.
So through research, when I first, knew we were going to be talking about somatic healing, I did a little bit of research about somatic therapy. And one of the things that I found is that people often try to revive the memory of the past, of whatever that traumatic experience was, and those things that are sensitive, to analyze the client's physical response. And so I feel as though maybe that's something that might scare people away from somatic healing, because I can say for myself, there are traumatic things from my childhood that I'm like, I don't ever want to think about that again. Like, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to dream about it. Like, if I even have a nightmare about it, I am livid, because I'm like, I thought it was gone and erased. So how do you feel about like this particular thought that people may have about like somatic healing? Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. I actually think that somatic experiencing and the somatic modality is the least scary form of therapy. I always tell my mom, you have to go. It's so nice because you don't have to talk. Because with somatic, actually, you are not thinking about the memories. So you don't even have to go back to the story. It's not about the story. It's more about the energy that is trapped in your body from those memories. And so the cool thing is about, and I think EMDR is the same way. I don't teach EMDR. I've done it, but I don't know much about it. But as a practitioner, but the cool thing is that you, in those modalities which work with your body, you don't have to go into the story. You just go into the energy. So, yes, the energy is really strong sometimes. I personally don't work with people who have very active trauma where, you know, if they talk about it, they're like checked out and flighty. And I can pretty much tell that when I first speak to people if they're in that space, because I'm not a therapist. I mean, so, but I don't shy away from working with trauma, and I believe every single one of us has trauma. But even in those cases, which, you know, I was in that space for a really long time, it's really encouraging to know that in somatic therapy, you don't have to tell the story again. You don't have to go into it. So I'll give you an example. If there is something that triggers the story, or you just have the memory of the story, then the person will tell you, okay, just feel that in your body and just start with that. And then you're not thinking about the story the whole time. You're just staying with the energy. So you're not saying like, my dad did this or my mom did this. It's like, right now I feel a lot of pressure in my chest right now. And then, okay, what do you feel next? So that's how it works. So I actually find it to be the least intimidating or scary way to work through things.
Interesting. Wow. Okay, so again, going with your example, would you say that like the story comes up, and then once the story comes up, it's like you stop talking about whatever that is that's sensitive and then start talking about what you feel in your body? Did I get that right?
So I think it really depends on the person that you work with. When I work with people, I do talk with them a lot. So I don't do like somatic healing the whole session. But something that's really important is in somatic experiencing, you don't actually want people to feel overwhelmed. So it's very, very important that people work from a place of, it's called nervous system regulation, where your nervous system is pretty calm. It can be a little bit dysregulated, but definitely not to the point where you're like, oh my God, I can't handle this. Like, this is too much, because that's re-traumatizing. And that's like never the goal. We always want people to heal from a very stable place. So when I start to see my clients either like yawning a lot or just like looking around, they're not with me anymore. I can sense that they're not present. And I will also teach them to recognize I'm overwhelmed, which is so cool. Like in the beginning, I noticed it, and they might not, because they have lived overwhelmed their whole lives. So they don't even know what it means. But I start to notice, and I sort of teach them, like I will ask them, are you overwhelmed? And then they'll start to be able to tell me I'm overwhelmed. Okay, let's stop. Now I want you to go into your safe space. Just imagine your favorite place in the whole world and feel into it and feel that in your body, instead of like more and more and more trauma. So that's why it's a slow process, but it's so effective, because it's not only like shifting that specific memory, it shifts the whole way of being of that person. And I have seen it happen to others, and I have felt it myself. And like now my mom even says, oh my God, you're so different. Like you're so much more at peace. Like she can sense that, you know, so it's really, really cool.
Wow, that's awesome. And these are things I'm excited to practice. Like, it's so fun because every week, as I've been going through this journey of helping others shift out of shock, even though I was able to find things to get out of it myself, I'm still learning what I can do to further that process. And honestly, what I can do in the future, because it's not like something's not going to repeat itself. We're always going to have problems that we deal with in life, things that just come up. So I'm really excited that I'm learning all these tools and resources that I can apply to say, okay, now for the next time, it's not all going to get me all the way down, because where I was in December. In January, it was definitely so hard that I was kind of like curled up in a ball on my couch, not moving for like a couple of days type bad. And, and that's not a good place to be in. And
Yeah.
thankfully, I had like friends and family, really family, that was able to recognize it and to help me pull myself out of that place. And then I was even talking to myself to like pull myself out of that place. um but if you don't do those things, and if you don't know things like this, small sensations like your body being hungry, like I'm sitting there on the couch for over a day and I haven't eaten, and my body's like, hello, we need food, we need to sustain. And so really learning these things to get in touch with yourself, and to really fight against those things that are trying to keep you down.
It's so interesting you say that, because I remember also like actually not knowing when I was full or hungry. Like I had no idea.
Mhm.
And it's
Yeah.
exactly that. It's your body becoming numb from so many times that you ignored it. That's also something very common. I'm not saying that's your experience, but
Yeah.
this is something pretty common where it's like your body says something and you ignore. And that's where our intuition and instincts are like, okay, like I'm done talking to you, you and your mind now. It's just you and the
Yeah.
brain. And yeah, and that's a very hard experience, and how beautiful that you get to like teach from that place. And that's exactly the place that I teach from as well, is like learning to be in touch with my body and my intuition, and feeling like how exciting that is, and now like teaching from that place, and also knowing that this is a forever journey. Like it's not just like, oh, I fixed it, okay, I'm good. It's a
Yeah.
journey.
No, that's so true. Um, and so Marina, I heard you talk about it a pinch, and you were saying, "Oh, I tell my mom and I tell her I need to try this." So, in addition to yourself, how have you been able to help others close to you, such as your loved ones, heal in this way? And I know in our one-on-one, you talked about your family dealing with like the Holocaust and stuff in the past. So, how have you really like use this to help them get through those past traumatic experiences?
So I'm a huge believer that whatever healing that you do for yourself, it's going to penetrate to the people around you without you even doing anything. So I find my family always being like curious and wanting to learn about what I'm doing. They come to my workshops a lot of times. But I've seen shifts, also in them realizing that they're at this like very high level of stress. Like I remember we were like packing to go hiking, and one of my family members called me. I was like, did you bring my socks? I need my socks. If I have my socks, I'm like, okay, don't worry, let's take a
Yeah.
breath, it's gonna be okay. Just like you were talking about the husband and wife. And then this person laughed because it was like, why am I stressed right now? Oh, I'm used to this. Like this is how I function, and this is how I used to function. Like there was never a time where I would leave my house and my partner and I, like we would be going on a trip and we wouldn't fight. We were always like fighting on the way to leave the house, because this is just how you do things. So that I think me working on myself, and obviously I'm not perfect and I still get this anxiousness and nervousness sometimes, but I think me working on my nervous system really affects people around, and they can tell that, oh, I'm so much calmer, like things trigger me so much slower. It takes a lot more to trigger me than before, and that really influences them, and then they go into looking into their own healing. I know like my mom really struggles with her mom, and so she learned a lot of tools from me on how to deal with her mom. And one of the things, for example, is that she's very sensitive, my mom, just like me. And her mom really affects her, like even her stress level or the way she speaks. So I kind of taught her like, mom, and because she asked, I never teach just like, this is what you should do, because that is not a good way.
Yeah.
But my mom just loves this stuff. So I told her, mom, when you see your mom and she starts to talk about something that is really stressful for you, and you just feel like it affects your nervous system, just start to imagine a bubble all around you and you're in this bubble and nothing can penetrate this bubble. And so my mom does this all the time and it works so well. Like she really feels like she can maintain her calm with her mom, which she could never do before.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, it's definitely amazing, and it definitely makes a lot of sense just when you talk through things of really how we respond, how it can affect others around us. So that's that's good, and it's something I feel like a lot of people really need to apply. And I know I keep saying this throughout this entire episode, but it's because it's definitely true. Um, and it even makes me think about like my own family. Like, for example, my grandmother, it's hard for her to talk about subjects such as like slavery or segregation because those were things that were near and dear to her. Like, you know, her grandmother experienced slavery or she experienced like segregation firsthand. And me, in just trying to know about it, so I know about history, I'm like, oh my gosh, like tell me about it. I want to know. I want to jot these things down. I want to, just absorb it all. But it's hard for her to talk about. But I notice, just like you said, like if I come to her in a peaceful way, and if my spirit is a little bit like calmer about it, rather than me being high, intense in emotions like she already is, then it makes it easier for her to talk about it. And I'm like, hey, this is really important because I want to help break family cycles, or I want to pass on our family history to the next person. And when I kind of approach it from that sense and in a calm tone, then even though it's something that's hard for her to talk about, she will, because it's how you approach it, it's how you say it. And my somatic response then triggers like her to be a little bit more calmer and be like, okay, since we're just talking of like, and you, like, I can tell like in her tone of voice, and she's like, okay, well, since we're talking about this to help the family or to help the next generation, and then she'll just start spilling all these details. But if I come to her like maybe after I've just watched a movie about segregation and my emotions are still in a tense place, and I'm like, I can't believe that they did this to this person. Like, Nana, were you there to experience this? Then it triggers something in her to where she's like, I don't want to talk about it. So yeah, I definitely.
That makes so much sense. And also, like, her trauma, and it's already there, right? So it's probably very easy to bring up that level of nervous system dysregulation where she's just like in that state. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's a great gift that you can give to her to like kind of like not relive it, but almost like through stories, but like with a different energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm glad that you talked about that how we can do that with our loved ones, and then how our healing can then impact them. It's going to change the world. Yeah. So before we get to our last question, we have a quick blur from our sponsor, and then we will be right back. This episode of The Shift is sponsored by the Ultimate Faith Store. This store carries faith-based apparel and accessories for men, women, and children. Their foundation scripture is Matthew 17:20, which reads, "Faith can move mountains." Up to 15% of all purchases are donated to charities, small communities, and people in need around the world. To purchase an item from the Ultimate Faith Store, please use the link attached to this episode and the code JCamille for 10% off. Now, back to you, Jay. Okay, Marina. So it's time for our last question, which I'm really sad about because this has been such a great podcast episode and you're teaching me so much. And I know if I'm learning a lot, my listeners are learning a lot because these are things that we don't talk about on the air on a normal basis. But what are 3 tips or pieces of advice that you would give to a listener tuning into this episode?
So the first one is self-compassion, because a lot of times when we go back, when we experience these things that we really want to change about ourselves, or when we feel frozen and indecisive, then we really judge ourselves. And there's a lot of teachings about affirmations, which affirmations are great. However, if in a moment you feel like I really hate myself right now, then it's not going to work to say I am wonderful. Your brain is just not going to believe it. And that's kind of where self-compassion bridges the gap. And so self-compassion can sound like, right now, I do not like myself, and that is a very difficult experience for me. May I be healthy. May I be well. May I live with ease. And then you can bring it out into the world. May all beings be well. May all beings be healthy, etc. And I love practicing this. Whenever I catch myself in super critical mode, which is often, I just catch myself and I know, this is the voice that is active in my head right now. And so I will go into kind of a self-compassion rant with myself. And it's so freeing because you realize, first of all, this is not the truth, right? Like there is nothing wrong with me. It's just my head telling me because it's used to telling me. And so when you kind of take a pause and you almost separate from that critical, judgmental mind, it really, really helps. So self-compassion is huge. And I love to teach my clients this. It's very freeing. The second one is to go into the body and really form a relationship with your body and do it really slowly. So don't expect miracles to happen in a day, right? If you have been feeling this indecisiveness, if you have been feeling stuck in your life, if you've been feeling any kind of sensation of freeze, it will take time for your body to basically open up to you. But just know that everything that you need, literally everything, is in your body. It's not, no one's going to save you. You're going to save yourself. And just have a little faith that this is a process of you creating that connection, because for many years you severed that connection. So just be really gentle, and also know that, every process like this, it might trigger a lot of tiredness or you might need to rest a lot. So I find myself resting sometimes more than other times when I go through these processes. But also it's very, very freeing, and you feel so much more alive in your life, not just like around one specific memory, but just the sensation of being alive comes back to you. And it's the most amazing thing. Like there are no words that can ever explain how good it really feels. So really connecting with your body, doing it with a lot of self-compassion. And then also the awareness piece, which we already talked about, but all of the awareness about your childhood. I know you mentioned that for you, it can be a scary place. And for a lot of people, it's a scary place. And so really doing it gently and knowing that those memories and those moments, they are not going to rule your life forever, especially if you are an adult now and you start to recognize that they just don't have that hold over you. And know that your body, it's like a survival machine. So whatever it recovers, like whatever memory it's ready to work on, it will bring it to you. And if you start to see like the situations, the problems, but also like the situations that happen in your life, you'll see like, oh, life is telling me right now that I need to work on XYZ. Life is always there to teach you. And those things will just repeat until you're like, okay, I'm ready to listen. And so really pay attention to the things that keep coming your way. And really, the reason that I call myself a transformational coach and not a life coach is because my coaching is not about like support in your daily life, even though it also is, but it's really about going to the roots and looking at where is this coming from and how can we shift it so that the shift is massive in every area of your life for the long term. And so, because behaviors and thoughts and beliefs, they really stem from your childhood and your teenage years, and they don't just like pop up. So it's really powerful to go back and look and just, of course, do it gently and lovingly. And you don't have to go back into memories that make you feel really overwhelmed. You can start with something small and examine that.
Man, those are so good. Thank you so much, Marina, for sharing. And honestly, might I add one more that I think I would put on top of all of those, or not on top, but in addition, is don't be afraid to try, because oftentimes a lot of us are so afraid of what might come up in therapy or somatic experiences and this coaching, that we don't even try it, and we're like, I don't want to talk about the past, or this is too sensitive, or I've trapped this away, that we never just step out and try. But the thing is, what's on the other side of your fear is freedom. So it's like, push past that fear, because on the other side is your freedom, is your healing, is everything that you've been waiting for. All of this, even when you talk about, sometimes when you go to therapy sessions or go through these experiences, that you might be tired, but you get the best sleep of your life when you release it. That's what I noticed. Like when I go to therapy and I'm like, oh my gosh, this was mentally exhausting because I had to think about what it was that I was going through. It's like, but once we brought it all to the surface and started to pull out those roots and what, like, really digging deep, I have the best feelings ever. Like the best sleep, the best release, the best rest of the week, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so much freer, so much lighter from this. So whoever it is that's listening, don't be afraid to try, because on the other side of all these things that she's mentioned is your freedom.
It's so true. And if you are scared, just know that it's like the little child within you that's like, no, I'm scared. And we all have that, every single human. And so you can talk to that child and be like, okay, I know you're scared right now. I know this is scary. I get that. And I am 33 years old, or however old you are. And I got you. Like, we're good. We're going to do this. And I'm going to be there for you. So it's that kind of self-talk that really helps me, because I know it's my little child self that will just pop up and be like, I'm scared. I don't want to do this. Right.
Yeah.
So that really helps me.
No, that's good. And once you overcome that child in yourself, like, and I know not everyone like has kids or wants kids, but for those that do, it helps the next generation coming after you. A lot of people nowadays are really big into, I want to break this family cycle, whatever that family cycle is. And they're saying, like, the cycle stops with me. Well, if you don't want your children to experience those little child fears that you're going through, if you don't do it for anyone else, do it for them. And even if you don't have any kids, like, but you have nieces or nephews, do it for them. Because as you heal, just like you said, Marina, then those around you are going to see your healing, and then they're going to want some of that too. So essentially, it's going to help everyone else coming after you, everyone else in your family, once you decide to go ahead and take the step to heal.
So good and so true.
Yes. Well, thank you again, Marina, for joining us on The Shift and talking to us about somatic healing. That is all for me. I'm Camille. Marina, tell us where we can follow you on social media.
I am on marina.y.t on Instagram, and my website is marinayt.com.
Awesome. Well, y'all heard it from her. Go give her a follow. And that's all from me. I will see you guys next week on our episode of The Shift.